From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast.
The fastest growing entertainment phenomenon of this generation.
I, Prophet of Esports, joined today by my friend and co-host William Collis.
Yeah, we got the book of esports out. It's a big deal.
So everyone knows me as the Prophet and William as the Professor.
They may call me the Prophet, but in my life outside of the business of esports, I have worked on the investment side of the table for the better part of the last 2 decades. The single fastest growing area of gaming and esports is gambling. It's booming right now. You don't need to be a prophet like me to see that. However, as an investor, I've stayed away from gambling and betting companies because of the reputational risk and often shady nature of the companies involved. This was true until now. I've recently bought stock in a new public company called Esports Entertainment Group, or EEG, which is focused on esports and gambling. The big difference that changed my mind is that EEG is a public company, NASDAQ listed, and fully regulated, focused on esports betting. The regulatory and audit requirements of a public company are key in my mind to provide the needed transparency for players, bettors, and investors. I had an opportunity to host the CEO of EEG on this podcast a couple of months ago, and I was very impressed by his vision for the company. We've stayed in touch, and I'm delighted to announce that they've accepted to become a sponsor of the podcast. If you're a family office, institutional investor, or investor of any kind, really, Esports Entertainment Group, ticker symbol GAMBLE, GMBL, might be one of the best ways to get exposure to the esports betting space and gaming in general. Make sure to check them out at esportsentertainmentgroup.com. Having said that, I need to make sure to state that this is only my opinion. I'm not an investment advisor or selling stock in the company. Please make sure you do your own research and seek advice from a licensed professional if you're looking to invest in the field. From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast. I am Paul Dewalibi. I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, William Collis. For those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome to the official podcast of esports. What we do here is we cover the most pressing gaming and esports topics and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze the business implications of everything happening in this industry. For our regular listeners, thank you guys for tuning in every week. Thank you for those 5-star ratings and reviews. Thank you for all the love you give to us. We really appreciate it. If you haven't told your friends about the podcast, please do so. If you haven't left a 5-star rating and review, please do so. If you haven't bought the book of esports, what are you waiting for at this point? Actually, I think, William, I saw it was on sale.
On
Amazon.
I hope so. It gets promoted now, but here, I'll just hold up a copy for people watching it. Look, ooh,
and by the way,
beautiful.
if you read the book of esports and you loved it as much as I did, and really I loved the first page the most, go leave a review on Amazon for William, right? Like this is how you can show him some love.
Guys, 5-star reviews on Amazon. Seriously, it does actually really help. If you enjoyed the book, it's the greatest. It's the nicest thing you can do. It really does mean a lot to me.
Or you guys can buy some Business of Esports merch, which I'm always wearing now. So if you want to look like the Prophet, there you go. That's all you have to do. William, we've got it's you and me this week. We've got no guest this week. We have tons of guests coming actually in the next few weeks and months. So This is kind of an interesting little break. We get to go back to doing some news stories.
Yeah, we actually get to cover news as opposed to just like interview the guests. So this will be a good one.
It'll be a good one. We have so much to talk about. Can I just start though with, and usually we do this as a segment on the live stream. For those of you who don't tune into the live stream, we do a live stream every Wednesday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time after we tape the podcast. It's a lot of fun. We have a bigger cast. We get to sort of interact with you guys, the fans, our listeners, our viewers. But we always do a segment called What Are We Playing This Week? And I can tell you, William, I am like totally hooked on Valheim at the moment.
Which is honestly, Paul, top 10 anime betrayals that you started Valheim and did not in. This is like a game that I would genuinely love to play. And
Why
where
are we
was my
limiting
server
this?
invite, Paul? Where was my server invite?
Why are we limiting this to anime betrayals? Could this not just be top 10 betrayals of all time?
I thought that was like a meme that people used,
is
like
it?
top 10. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, top 10 betrayals, whatever. Yeah, no,
I'm
but so
sorry.
you've been really enjoying it.
I have, and you know, I would say, you know, I'm not like the picking up on the trends in gaming guy, right? Like I didn't play. I played Among Us, but I didn't really like it. I played Phasmophobia, but I didn't really like it. You know, this is one of these breakout hits that, for whatever reason, I love. I truly have fallen in love with, and I think the game's so brilliant. And it's kind of like a good segue into the first story I wanted to cover here. If I just share my screen, let's hope this works this week. And that's Valheim. And then this, I mean, this is telling. This headline. The headline here is from PCGamer.com, and it says Valheim may well be Steam's biggest ever viral hit with 2 million copies sold. It's now the third most played game on the platform. They had, at the time of this article, which was 2 days ago, 370,000 concurrent players over that on Steam, and rapidly rising. In 13 days, it says Valheim has accomplished a player count that would put many other massive hit games to shame. Like, it's beating out PUBG, it's beating out Rust. It's like, you look at this chart, and unfortunately for our podcast listeners, you can't see the chart, but like the player growth on Valheim is literally outstripping everything. It's a runaway hit, no question. $20 game, developer sort of like a relatively unknown
still in
developer.
early access, right? Isn't it still in early access?
Still in early access.
Yeah.
Iron Gate, I had not heard of this developer before now. I don't know if you have. But this is a huge success. And then there's this other article before I hand it over to you here, William, to get your thoughts. Valheim is the endless Viking survival game we have craved for years. This is from arstechnica.com. Vikings, voxels, and valor, why we're hooked on Steam's newest early access success. Now, the reason I bring this up, obviously I'm enjoying it, and you feel betrayed that you're not on our server.
I'm just teasing you. I'm teasing you.
But you know I love you. You know you can join the server anytime.
Yeah, just to get your hand-me-down items, Paul. That's what this is going to be. Like, I'm going to come in and beg, like, do you have any iron armor for me? No, I don't know.
Iron armor is pretty dang good. I think you'd be doing very well if you came in.
Well, that's why I'm going to join your server, so I can get...
But no, there's a bigger like business question here, which is, I have two questions for you. One, why are we in this era of seemingly like out of nowhere hits? I don't know if that's the best way to describe it. And two, where are the AAA developers in all this? Like, why do they seem to be missing the boat?
Yeah, well, it's tricky because those are two questions that seem linked, but I don't necessarily think are, right?
Okay.
Like, I think the first thing that's going on is just like Steam has, and all these distribution, like the fact is there is mass direct to consumer distribution, right, for games. We've had this for a long time, but it really has reached a new level of saturation and adoption by common players, I think, or everyday players, right? I think in large part because so many console downloads and other, like just everything has moved online. So these distribution services have just grown in power over the years. And that allows smaller companies, like let's go back in time 15 years. I don't think Iron Forge could have gotten this game placed at GameStop, right? And if they had, or EB, Electronics Boutique, or KB Toys, or wherever you bought your
this
games,
is like blast from the past now.
Yeah, like let's
wasn't there one
not distributed at Walmart today.
Was Babbage's one of them?
Babbage's is another good one.
Remember that
there's
one?
a lot of classic games retailers, right? So like there's no longer the issue of acquiring the shelf. And by the way, if they had gone into those stores, they would have been like bottom shelf, back of desk product, right? So like you've eliminated that barrier. That's one thing. I think another thing is Steam has done a really good job of training its player base to look at different types of titles through its recommendation systems, right? So like Steam does an excellent job of surfacing games to you might not otherwise know, even when they're early on. Like, we've seen a number of big hits come out of early access. Case in point, my game of the year, arguably last year, was Hades, which I started playing in early access, and I actually enjoyed the title more for having joined it earlier in development. It was like a game that kept on getting free DLC for like a whole year. It was awesome. So that's part of it too. I think, though, there's a third element to the trend here, which is, look, it's difficult for just any big business structure, right? Whether it's movies, TV, or games, to take massive risks on something different. And let's be honest, if I describe to you I'm going to do an open world Viking survival game, right? Like, sounds cool, but it's hardly paint by numbers, hit FPS, or like, right? Like, it's not exactly something that is going to get greenlit and support because it's risky, right? And let's be honest, there are probably tons of other Viking games that we don't even know about that have come out on Steam and have disappeared because it's a marketplace where, it's very crowded and lots of developers can take their shot. And, it's the cost of failure is, significant to these developers who pour their hearts and souls into these games. In terms of absolute dollars, right, and time invested, it's not the same as a 400 or 300 person team at EA working on a title for 2 years, right? So the room for experimentation and novelty and risk taking is much higher. And so I think you've had all these three factors come together: distribution, sort of Steam getting smarter as a platform, and then the migration because of the cost increases of games for innovation to sort of smaller developers. And you get something like Valheim, right? And I'd point out, this is like the first time this happened, which I really think the first time I really thought something like this was happening was maybe with Fall Guys, right? Like, where it's
Yep.
like, oh, that came out of nowhere. But it's just happened so often this year.
Yeah.
We had Among Us, we had Phantasmagoria, we had, I mean, even Hades on my list. I know Supergiant is an established developer, has been around for a long time, but like, they're not, Bethesda, right? Like, it's just,
Yep.
and even before that, like, I played a what was it called? Mortal Shell, which was a Souls clone that I really liked, and my understanding was it did very well, right? There's just this huge resurgence in sort of these, I don't want to call them indie because I think it kind of that isn't quite the right term, but I would call it, smaller scale experimental niche title really defining itself. And it used to be these were kind of once a generation type of things like Minecraft, right? But now I feel like it's like every other month that there's a darling du jour title of the Steam community. And I think it's very good for games. I also think this is probably how big companies get into this type of development. I think what happens is the Valheims of the world are acquired as a property by EA or Activision, just like, Minecraft was acquired by Microsoft, right? That these smaller, it's like sort of almost gaming entrepreneurship, right? These smaller companies take risks, they establish a brand, bigger companies can come in and give that brand a platform and grow it.
Yeah. I mean, that's where I push back a little bit, though, William. I would expect that to be the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that hasn't really happened. And I would argue even some, like many of these breakout hits have not been able to sustain the popularity that they had initially, right? Look, I have higher hopes for Valheim, but who knows? Fall Guys definitely didn't sustain,
Mm-mm.
right? Among Us, maybe a bit better. Phasmophobia definitely didn't sustain. That fell off a cliff,
Yep.
right? So, like, some fall off a cliff, some sort of continue
But,
to live
but
on.
but there's sort of like two pushback elements here, right? We think sustaining is very important today because we live in a big publisher dominated world where games as a service, and esports are metrics of success, right? Like, you're expected to be playing the same game 6 months from now, 2 years from now, if it's a hit, than you were like, 6 months, 2 years, right? But if think about it from the perspective of these developers, right? If you move 1 million copies of this game or of your game at $20 a copy, right?
They moved 2 million at
They
20
moved 2
bucks a
million, by
copy.
the way, so even better than that, right? Like, that's it. That's a massive success for you. You don't really, obviously, you care about the product. You probably have pride and authorship, and you're going to keep developing the thing, but you've made your money. These Steam games, these sort of more, I think I'll use indie for the term, these indie Steam darlings are operating more on a model that's like the traditional cartridge model that we are familiar with. And in a cartridge world, nobody was concerned when you stopped playing Sonic the Hedgehog to play Sonic the Hedgehog 2. You expected that these games would last you a month, 2 months, 3 months, maybe. And if they were really good, yeah, you'd pick them up and play them again a year from now or something. But it's a totally different business model that's coexisting. The large publishers are on this live stream basis or those live games as a service model to maximize the returns from these heavy investment properties. And these smaller developers can do more sort of single serving experiences. Although I must admit, in the case of Valheim, I think that won't be what happens. I think it looks like these developers have a lot more content they want to add. They clearly have plans to round it out. And in general, the survival genre that this is in is a genre that has done very well, even in the indie space, for regular updates and engagement. So I'm quite bullish on this for legs for at least, at least the near future.
Yeah. The other pushback I have is, you said there's a little bit like of the startup entrepreneurship model here, right? But why haven't we seen, like, no one has scooped up these developers, right? And despite that, all of them have had hits. And I would argue maybe even more than just acquiring these smaller developers. I would have expected, and I go back to another example, Escape from Tarkov, right? This is another game that the developers didn't even like, they're building some other game. And they've said this, right? Escape from Tarkov was like a test for them, like a little fun side project that turned into something that sold millions of copies, right? And they were not expecting it to do that well. It's not on Steam even, right? Like this was a hit for them against all odds, right? Like they were not planning on it being a hit. And the game is broken, right? As fun as it is, like it's fundamentally broken. The netcode's terrible and you're always laggy. Even my, $10,000 PC only gets like 150 frames per second, right?
Oh, only 150, Paul. Bring out those humble brags.
Well, no, but when you have two 3090s, you expect to crush everything, right? But my point is, like, you have this great concept for a game built on a shoestring budget by an unknown developer. Why aren't the AAA devs, like or AAA publishers, saying, wait a second, people love this concept, right? It's a little bit MMO-ish. It's a little bit like, because you go in, you do these, sort of missions, you get to keep all the stuff if you make it out alive. Like, it's a unique play style that people love. How hard is it to go, if you're Activision Blizzard, to say, let's just take this, put it on the Call of Duty engine. We already have something way better, right? And who knows? Maybe it's even a Call of Duty mode, right? Or it's its own game. Well, why aren't they acting on this?
Well, I'd point out to you, AAA publishers have done this. This is Fortnite. Fortnite did not start as a battle royale. They were a zombie defense game or whatever. They looked at PUBG. They're like, oh, maybe we should do that. And then bam, you had for the Fortnite we know today. So they do this. Yeah, I
am surprised, William. Like, they haven't. Right? Well, like EFT and Valheim to me are relatively unique gameplay genres, right? And I have not seen like the fast follow-up from the AAA developers. That I think is what surprises me the most. Because if I'm the senior executive at Activision Blizzard or EA, the day I see Valheim doing this, going up and to the right, or EFT going up and to the right, I'm like, guys, like, let's build this. We can build it better. We can crush these guys.
Yeah, get me a team. We're gonna have 30 people, 50 people on this.
Yeah.
It's a really good question. I mean, you take my point that historically it has happened, right? Like, we can point to developers taking inspiration from topical hits to quickly adjust a franchise and market. Yeah, I think probably the reality is, it's a couple things. One is, do these games sustain? You don't know that, right? For every Escape from Tarkov or EFT, which is held, right? There's a Phantasmagoria or whatever it is, which is like, that was awesome. Okay, now we're done with it. So one is, there's a question of, is this really just the community is latching onto something and it's fun for a couple? Is there legs here? That's a piece of it. I think a second piece is the way these publishers are set up have extremely aggressive schedules, and they have to live service their existing games. They don't just have to make new products. They have to keep updating the products they already have. So how do you fit this in, right? It's not like you have all these people who work on Call of Duty just sitting around being like, oh, I have to ship this for another 2 years. I'm not doing it. Like, it's a very intensive job. So it's probably not a lot of idle resources, right? And so probably when you do look at these things, the way they creep in is inspiration into the development cycle. So you maybe will see these mechanics, but they'll come 2 or 3 years from now when, development has had its time to run its course. And the question is that going to be way too late, right? Like, we're not going to care about that because the market is going to have moved on, or consumer tastes are going to have moved on? And that's a really interesting question. And I don't know, but what surprises me more, like I said, is why don't you just acquire these people? Like that would be what I would do. Like, is you'd come in and say, look, this is a great brand, but how much more game could you build here if you had 10 people, as opposed to 5, right? We'll put 10 people on it. We'll give you resources. We'll cash you out, and this can be folded in, and you'll have the best net code, dedicated servers, right? Like in Valheim, like you have to set up your own server for it, right? Like, there's all this
Which
quality
I
of
have
life
no
stuff.
lack of hardware to do so, but
Yeah, well, yeah, but we'll market it, like, I mean, it is a bit weird that you don't see. To me, it's not the copy of the inspiration stuff so much as it is the the acquisition. Like, I would think
especially
you
for
would
like
see
an
that.
Activision Blizzard, right? That's been like doing share buybacks and wasting billions of dollars. When to me, if their corporate M&A department was really savvy, right, they'd be moving in on every one of these. Like again, this is like pennies for an Activision Blizzard.
Yeah, I mean, the counterpoint is, do these people want to sell, right? Like, they've just made a ton of money because their game has moved, 2 million copies on Steam, right? They're probably, look, you probably didn't get into game development because you wanted to make a ton of cash. You probably, if you're doing indie games, you probably have a true passion for making a specific type of product, and you're really scared about the oversight and control that's going to come in when you sell. You're looking at stories about how, like, people felt after they sold. Like, I think, Notch in his sale, I think, didn't he not regret it because he made a lot of money, but he kind of lamented what he could have done for Minecraft. Like, there's those cautionary tales out there, right?
I would not call the $6 billion
Yeah,
exit
that's a
for
bad
Minecraft
example.
a
That's a bad
cautionary
example. Like,
tale.
oh, I got $6 billion. Oh,
Like,
woe is
no,
me. But
yeah, what a tough life.
it's just so hard. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, but like the bigger thing for me is, and why I think we're talking about this on the podcast, is this clearly isn't like just a one-off or two-off thing. This is clearly a trend. We're going to see this. It's going to be every 2 or 3 months now, a new Steam darling is going to break out. And the real question is, what does this mean for an industry when you can start to assume? And I think we're getting to a stage where you can assume this, that once a quarter, there will be a game by an unknown developer that blows up and captures the hearts of Twitch and gamers everywhere. And like, does that, what does that mean? Like, to me, that looks like it's a lot worse to be a big publisher because now I have more competition and I can't predict where it's coming from, right? So like, does that make the market harder? But then maybe does it make the market better because it kind of distills, like, you kind of have a bifurcation where you have innovation and, kind of like more niche experiences being handled by one end of the market. So the higher end of the market can focus on marquee brands and, triple, like, does it actually protect and insulate the larger developers and publishers from risk in that regard in a weird way? So it's interesting, but I do think, like, I always think we should do a segment on the podcast, like, what's hot this quarter, because that's what's going to happen. It's going to be regular now. This has happened too much and too frequently to be something that's, there are a bunch of good games that came out. It's actually structurally, we are seeing the market make these hits, and it's going to continue.
Look, I think Valheim's an example of just great innovation in the gaming space. The gameplay is innovative. The whole game is a 1 gigabyte download, William. 1 gigabyte. We're talking a world where Call of Duty is 100 gigabytes, right? Like, what they've managed to do in such a small size is nothing short of miraculous, right? And I think the business takeaway I have is the big AAA publishers need to completely recalibrate their corporate M&A departments. They're not fast enough. They're not nimble enough. They're not responsive enough to this new world that you've described, right? Where once a quarter you have a new hit. Because I don't think they can go forever just ignoring this or waiting till one of them becomes Minecraft size and then buying them for 6 billion, right? Like, if they were smart, they're buying them at 100 million or 50 million, not 6 billion.
Yeah. And I would point out, like, we've always had, this is not like new that there are indie hits on Steam, right? Like, we've had that for the last 5-10 years, right? What's new is the size and scale and the speed with which they take to the market, right? It used to be like an indie hit would move 100,000 copies and you'd be like, that's incredible. And it would hit, 100,000 concurrent players. You'd be like, it's just like, these are really approaching sale levels and player engagement levels that are equivalent to, like basically fully marketed and launched titles, you know?
William, let's move on. We got a lot to cover still.
Yeah.
This next story is from the Esports Observer,
Mhm.
and the headline here is the International Olympic Committee remains focused on virtual sports over esports. So the article really talks about how the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, has released their 2020 plus 5 agenda, sort of talking about recommendations for the organization as it evolves over the next few years. And they in this report, they've made clear that their focus on virtual sports, or what they call video game simulations of sports already accepted in their ecosystem, should take precedence and should be focused on over traditional like competitive gaming. In other words, like League of Legends, Call of Duty, etc. And that the IOC will aid in the development of virtual or simulated versions of established sports. So they don't want to include the League of Legends or the Call of Duties of the world, but they are open to including things like Madden and NBA 2K. William, what do you make of this?
Well, you know, I make many things of this, but first of all, it's just such a weird distinction to draw, right?
It
Like, it's
is.
such an artificial distinction that, like, somehow because a digital experience was based off of an underlying pre-existing physical experience, it should be, you know, like, it should be treated differently as a class of digital experience. And that's like, it's weird, and it's also wrong because I could argue, like, you have shooting and target shooting in the Olympics, right? Like, isn't Call of Duty like shooting? You know, isn't that a
Well, they
simulation? I
would
mean,
say, we should have a biathlon game that simulates the proper biathlon, not Call of Duty.
yeah, but it's this weird sense, which is like the sport is the thing that is in the Olympics, right? And therefore it can change form and function, right? But it has to stay the same. And that just doesn't really jive with my understanding or my intuition about what happens when a medium like sports changes form factor, right? Like, you know, when you go, I think I argue this in the book of esports actually, so I'm going to quote, you know, myself basically here, but like nobody goes to see a movie that's an adaptation of a book and expects it to be a one for one recreation, you know, of like, oh, well,
Some
they
Lord
didn't
of the
have like,
Rings fans, maybe, but
well,
you
maybe,
know,
yeah, but, you know, like, everybody understands that you have to when things change medium, you have to you have to alter things, right? Like, it can't be quite the same, and, you know, actually, one of the best things about good adaptations is they are improved by by crossing medium. Like, they actually and I'll give an example of this, which is controversial, but I think it's true. The early seasons of Game of Thrones, I think and again, I'm probably gonna get slaughtered for this, but like they they really improve the quality of the Game of Thrones things really improve upon the books. I think they tighten the plotting, they expand some of the characters, they throw out some of the threads, and they build in all this world and structural stuff that, yes, there's some of it in the books, but they re-express it in a way that works for a digital medium. And I think that like it creates a parallel experience, but it's fundamentally different. If you read the books and watch the TV show, you're not experiencing the same thing, even though it's literally the same story with the same characters, right?
yep.
So yeah.
I come back to sort of I'm so tired of this like Olympics esports at the Olympics argument, William. Like for me, this is like, okay, it's proof they don't get it. Let's move on. We don't need the Olympics, right? Like I think this was one of our very earliest podcasts where we talk about esports at the Olympics. Do we really need they're okay? It's one of those things where I think the Olympics potentially goes the way of like football. The average viewer gets older and older and older. Eventually those demographics start working against you, right? Like you end up with a viewership that's all 50 plus, and over time that's just no good, right? And esports will dominate that 18 to 34 viewership, as we spoke about last week on the podcast, and this becomes quite dangerous for their business. And if they don't recognize that now, chances are they will recognize it too late, and then that ship has sailed. And when you read reports like this where they fundamentally don't seem to understand like that competitive gaming is just as much League of Legends as it is Madden, and there really should be no differentiation between the two. One is not superior to another or more acceptable to the other. That level of misunderstanding or not understanding the space, to me, signals something pretty bad in terms of their future prospects.
Well, it also just theoretically doesn't jive with me. Like, are we to say today that every sport that ever can exist has already been invented? I don't take that premise as true. I think there could be new physical sports that come into being that we fall in love with, right? So why can't you have a new digital sport that comes into existence? It's like it presumes that we're done innovating the category of human competition, which I just don't think is true.
I think they're overvaluing their brand, frankly. Right? Like 2020 came and went. Did anyone care that the Olympics never happened?
Well, that's the other thing is like,
And
we're
that's
going to
maybe
get into
harsh,
games
but did
development.
anyone
Like,
care?
who's clamoring for the IOC to develop? Like, oh, what's holding back our esports today is the IOC isn't. And I'm not trying to be facetious, but like, it's just
Yeah.
like, it's not a business they're known for. Like, I actually think the IOC could do a lot of good. They do have a powerful brand. They do command a lot of credibility. The Olympics is, I mean, let's be honest, it's real tradition. Like, I mean, for all that we can say that there's iconoclasm in esports, like there's something wonderful about being connected to deep history of people striving against each other. So there's a lot of good that they can bring, but I don't, and I have no problem with them being excited about esports, like, or sports games. Like, those
It's
are
better
great.
than nothing.
Yeah, and those are great, and they could be there too, but I have this problem of saying, like, "Okay, well, we're just gonna do the sports games, and we're not gonna do League of Legends," when it's like, it's a distinction that's totally artificial, and it doesn't even pass kind of a prima facie, analysis.
Yeah. Before we move on, just one quick word for our audience here. You guys know I've been talking about esports betting for a while. As an investor, I've stayed away from it because of the reputational risk. But esports betting is literally the fastest growing area of the entire industry. It's booming right now. You don't need to be the prophet like me to see that. As an investor, like I said, I've stayed away because of the reputational risk until now. I highly recommend you guys check out a company called Esports Entertainment Group. They're a public company, NASDAQ listed, fully regulated, focused on esports betting. They're doing incredibly well right now. And, we've had people from the company on the podcast and the live stream. Love what they're doing from a strategy perspective. If you're a family office, if you're an institutional investor or investor of any kind, highly recommend checking out Esports Entertainment Group, ticker symbol GMBL, like gamble. It might be one of the best ways to get exposure to the esports space. Having said that, this is just my opinion. I'm not an investment advisor. I'm not selling stock in the company. Do your own research. Seek advice from a licensed professional if you're looking to invest in the field. William, let's move on to our next topic here. And this one, I find we rarely touch on it, but it's such an exciting piece of the esports puzzle and the gaming puzzle, and that is the Middle East. And we have 3 stories today, all coming from the MENA region, and I would love to just lump them all together and sort of have a discussion. Let me just introduce them all here. So the first is from KhalijTimes.com, and it's talking about Abu Dhabi launching a new creative visa scheme, which I will talk about in a second. The second article is from Al Jazeera, and they're talking about the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund investing $3.3 billion in video game stocks. Supposedly, the video game industry has been favored by the Saudi crown prince, and because he's the first generation in the kingdom to grow up playing video games. And then the third article, which was from zdnet.com, talks about how inside the Middle East, growing love for esports. And the subheadline, which I love, says, with high internet penetration and lots of gamers, an esports boom could be on the way across the region. So 3 stories, all incredibly positive. Just general thoughts, William. Let me just say on the visa point first, this is just such a cool idea. Basically, they're allowing people to immigrate to Abu Dhabi to work there. If you're operating in the esports field, basically. So esports falls under their creative visa domain, which I wish the US would do something like that. Like, I think it's just incredibly brilliant when you have a booming industry like this.
But your thoughts in general?
Well, I mean, I want to separate kind of the third article from the first two. The big thing is I think esports is going to boom everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so anywhere where esports is less popular today, I think it's going to be more popular in the future, right? And I think regions that again have it less so today just have more of an upward tick they're going to experience, because I think this would be like sports is going to get popular, like sports will be popular everywhere. It's sports, you know. So I think that article is a little that one's an interesting one, and it's exciting, and I think it speaks to clearly something is happening in the region where the trends are catching on and converging. I think it's the first two that are interesting because the visa
I will
thing, yeah,
just
I
say,
mean,
William, sorry,
mhm,
on the third article, just to put some numbers before you go to the first two. Like they're saying between 2018 and 2023, the number of dollars in the MENA region is going to double, right? So we're talking about, really exponential growth over a relatively short period of time. Uh, and they're talking about how, all the pieces are there, right? The
yeah,
5G connectivity, right? A lot of mobile gamers, a lot of, it's a wealthy region. They have
mhm,
disposable income, like all the pieces are there. And we're talking about also a region that includes Turkey, which is a major esports center already,
yes,
right?
yeah, yeah. Turkey's very big, yeah.
Anyway, sorry. So, and
Well,
you
no,
wanted
no,
to comment on
you're
the first
making
two.
you're making great points here, and I think it's the first two articles sort of compound those regional factors because one is talent, right? And
Yep.
a visa program that recognizes esports is going to help you move talent, into the
Yep.
region. And let's also be honest, is esports you can do it, reasonably remotely, right? Like, if you're a streamer, like you can stream from pretty much anywhere, right? So I do think there's more labor mobility in the esports market than you actually when it's getting credit for. So something like this could have a significant impact. And the other thing I'd say is the 3.3 billion investment. That's really interesting because that's so much money. That is voice. That's a voice to the table. Like you can't put that much money in. There isn't publicly traded esports companies, right? Right. Like, I think
Yeah.
it's
So it says according to the regulatory filing, they put the Riyadh-based public investment fund bought stock in Activision Blizzard, EA, and Take Two Interactive, and they put a total of 3.3 billion to work.
Yeah, I mean, that is enough money that now the management in those companies is gonna be having to listen to MENA voices. And I'm sure one of the questions that's gonna be asked by these investors is what's when is this coming to our region? What's being done to promote this? So I think that's gonna accelerate a trend by bringing some publisher focus. And I'm not saying they weren't already focused there already, but more focused than they already had to the MENA region from basically the largest publicly traded esports companies. So I think you're seeing a lot of favorable conditions come into place for esports in the Middle East, right? In MENA. And by the way, I think you're seeing there, you can chart similar stories in different countries around the world right now. I don't think this boom is exclusive to just the MENA region, but I think it goes back to that first point I said, which is the nice thing is because this is such a big opportunity, it's so global and it's so pan-human, like you're gonna see it everywhere. You
But
are.
but other than China, William, I think this is the only time we've seen this scale of investment and effort at a government level, right?
Yeah,
At
the
a
government support
at a
helps a lot.
leadership level where, and part of the quotes from this article from the Al Jazeera article are so good, right? Like they talk about how the crown prince, obviously he wants to diversify his economy away from oil, right, which is the primary revenue driver for the kingdom. um and he sees gaming as a key part of that, right? Like this is not insignificant, right? He has a lot of other choices to in terms of where to put these billions and where to diversify this economy. This is a conscious choice to say
Yeah.
we want to go here and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is. And to represent himself as a gamer is also, like, again, pretty major, I think, right? It would be like the president of a country, right, coming out, a pretty major country, coming out and saying, I'm a gamer, the whole country is going to be investing in gaming, right? And you don't, other than in China, we haven't really seen that. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, yeah, but it's also there's a generational divide that's getting bridged because it is true that like people who are 30 and 40 years old, right, grew up playing games, right? Not
Yep.
so of people who are 60 or 70. And I think what you're seeing is that when you have a new generation, entering leadership that appreciates games, they recognize games for what they are. It's a valid form of competition. It's a valid form of art. And it's perhaps most importantly, a very big business that if you're early to as a region or as a country, you can actually get a structural advantage. And I think, China for many reasons was first here, right? Arguably, and they're actually, it's not really fair to just say China. I know Malaysia has done a lot of things as well. I think, so but they get the most credit because they're the largest, biggest market.
Yeah,
And
but like,
yeah.
don't you think it's again? I would sooner have assumed you would see like the Japanese government going and making sort of big statements like this.
They have.
before.
If you look, the Japanese government has come out and said they've had a dedicated
In the billions?
target for yeah. The difference is, Paul, action and follow through, right?
Yeah.
Is in countries like China, you have seen follow through. In Japan, you've seen sort of policy targets and conversation. I'm not aware, at least, please listeners, please correct me, of like real concrete action that has backed up the policy agenda right now. And
Yep.
I think that's indicative of what I said, which is if it's sort of people who don't really get it, it can get floated. It can seem like a good idea. But if it's really inculcated in a leadership group, it's not just going to be something that's spoken about. It's going to be something that's done. Right.
I just couldn't be more bullish on Mina. Like again, it's one of those things where I feel like we, in terms of talking about it, are ahead of the curve. The same way, like I think I've been bullish on hardware, before anyone was really sort of thinking or looking at it. Mina is one of those things where I'm just so bullish on their potential, because when you have conviction and leadership that can actually get things done and huge amounts of dollars, and those three things come together, like good things tend to happen. And I think the industry needs that kind of, like, could use that level of enthusiasm and that level of investment from these kinds of governments. I'm just so bullish on Mina in gaming right now. I love seeing these stories, and I don't think it gets enough play.
I'm just excited to see more people getting gaming, and gaming getting more and more legitimized as a force for, really our generation. Like, I think this is going to be one of those, quite seriously, this is one of those generational shifts like television. You grew up with, you're either a radio person or a TV person, and people who grew up with TV got TV. Like, esports is going to be a generational marker for us, right? It's going to be one of those things that, like, you were either of the era where you understood it and it was native to you and you viewed, or you weren't. And it's a weird bifurcation in consumer behavior. But I love seeing anything that makes esports grow faster and that brings it to more people, because I think it's ultimately, I really do believe this. I think esports is a real force for good. There's a lot of challenges in our industry, let's be honest, right? But it fundamentally is, I think it's the best and most, maybe I should be careful I'd say, but it's like, it is one of the best and most fair venues for human competition. At least it has the potential to be, right? It has the potential to be a really wonderful way to connect people and bring people together. And I'm very excited about that. And I love to see it spreading to more places more quickly.
We're going to have the Crown Prince on the podcast to talk about his ambitions in gaming, William. I think
that's
I think
you,
that
Paul.
is the obvious next step.
You got to send that email.
That's it. Guys, that wraps up this week's podcast. Just a few things. One, if you loved how William sounded this week, please send him some love. He made a lot of effort to upgrade his whole audio setup. I think he sounds something like a cross between Barry White and James Earl Jones at the moment. So, it's a huge upgrade.
I am glad
and
that
it's
I
because
sound
he
better.
he loves this podcast and he loves you guys. So if you do appreciate that, please send him some love. Go leave a really great review on the Book of Esports on Amazon.
Yeah, that's the right way to do it. Five stars, great audio setup.
That's it. But also, this was a little bit of a short podcast this week. We are going to cover a bunch more topics on the live stream. Please go listen to that. Like, even if you don't make it for the live stream, we put them all up on Spotify, on Google Play, everywhere where you listen to this podcast. The live streams are also available in audio and video after the fact. So even if you don't make it, Wednesday nights at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, I highly recommend going and checking out the live streams, audio or video recordings, because we cover so many more topics that we just don't have time for on the podcast, because we always try and keep the podcast about 40 minutes to an hour, so it's bite-sized enough for you guys to consume in its entirety. As always, please leave those 5-star ratings and reviews. Tell your friends about the podcast, and go follow us: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, all these places. It's so easy to find us. Usually, it's Biz Esports or Business of Esports. That's another way to show some love here. As always, thank you, William. Awesome podcast this week. And for our listeners, we will see you guys next week.